Welcome to another brand new episode of CPOV Autographs. I am very excited to get into this week's episode, but before we do, I just want to briefly shout out my podcast, Fun and Games, specifically the subseries within it, Side Quests, where every episode a new host or a returning host comes on and talks about a game they love and why they love it. It's a simple dive into why we love the games we play. Free of judgment and free of scrutiny, and just kind of celebrating games that we love just because we love them. I really enjoy producing this series. As of when I'm recording this, the most recent episode that released was my third episode, which was an episode about the game Fuser, which you've heard me talk about here quite a bit, and why that kind of really changed how I looked at streaming and helped me get through the pandemic because of how much I love that game. So definitely go check that out. You can go to certainpov.com to find Fun and Games. If you click on that, the subseries is within that feed, or you can go to the podcast platform of your choice and just look up Fun and Games podcast, and we should come up. Definitely check that out along with the main show that I host with Jeff Moonen. It's really one of my favorite projects about games that I've been able to work on. So yeah, definitely go check that out. Anyway, on to this week's episode. I'm chatting with the incredible Rick Heinz. I was connected with Rick via previous guest, Pat Edwards. Rick Heinz also worked on the Red Opera, which we talked about on Pat's episode. We talk about that here. He's a writer. He also works on the Seventh Age books. There are two of them currently. The newest one, Dystopia, just came out. And so, yeah, we chat about Rick's writing, the books, the Red Opera, D&D, other geeky things, Star Trek, Star Wars, all sorts of stuff. And we just get to be big old geeks and have a really great chat. So I hope you will buckle in and really dig into this incredible conversation between me and the brilliant and lovely Rick Heinz. Rick, I'm really excited to chat with you. The incredible Rick Heinz. It's Heinz, right?
Like Heinz, like the ketchup. I wish I was related. I am not, but nonetheless, Heinz 57 was like the nickname that you get throughout high school when your name is associated with what everybody puts on just about everything.
That's true.
It is funny though, is I do get like internally offended if I sit down at a restaurant and I don't actually see Heinz ketchup on it. So I'm like, wait a minute,
Maybe it runs deep. You don't know that there's a familial connection, but you'll find out you're like the long lost heir to the Heinz.
Oh my God. What was really odd is when I met my fiance and she's from the UK, they don't do ketchup on anything at all, period. And so her association with Heinz was a can of baked beans. And it was like, not sure about this, because it's a can of beans. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? So
that's pretty funny. Well, Rick, I'm really glad to have you here. We, of course, got connected through the incredible Pat Edwards, who is a good friend and a previous guest of the show. Why don't you start by telling the listeners a little bit about what you do? You're an author and a writer. Talk about kind of the core things that you work on.
All right. So, people who are listening now don't have a clue who the hell I am, most likely, but I primarily write in sarcastic fantasy about the end of the world. I've been an author for about 5 years now. I just published my second novel. I've ghostwritten a bunch of other works, but normally what I do is I write the Seventh Age series, Seventh Age Dawn, Seventh Age Dystopia. And the whole shtick of this thing is that the Illuminati, Masons, and other secret societies have had magic forever, right? And what happens in Chicago when a group of anarchists level the playing field? Give that shit to everybody in the world. You can control people's minds or be immortal. All you got to do is summon up a demon, kill it, and eat its heart, which is bound to go over well when everybody tries that. Nothing can ever possibly go wrong. So it thus sarcastic tales about the end of the world. And the second book, what I just released, Dystopia, I'm super freaking proud of because it's all about magic returning and companies branding it, and how people don't read the terms of service agreements of what they're imbibing. It's like, oh, this unicorn was ground up to give you the ability to fly or see through walls. Like, what side effects is that going to have, you know? And but it's a big conspiracy, sort of like epic fantasy series set in modern day urban fantasy. I really liked multi-view protagonists and different factions where it's a land of moral grays. Nobody's either like truly right or wrong. They're just characters in the setting. And yeah, no, for 20 years, I've been a gamer and a storyteller, primarily running White Wolf games, you know, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Ascension, LARPs and things like that on the Riverwalk. But, you know, particularly back when like we'd all have trench coats and, you know, we were letting our inner goths out, and I would have these big like 600 man games. And I was doing freelance writing for game companies back then as well. And I sat on down to write a novel for like NaNoWriMo. I was like, all right, this is cool. This is fun. It's meditative. I listen to music. I have character soundtracks for everybody. But when I got done, I didn't stop, right? NaNoWriMo came and went, and I just didn't stop writing. I kept going and going and going and going. And then I had a full manuscript, a full freaking book. And I was like, crap, I wrote that. Now, you know, Geek and Sundry and Nerdist, about a few months after that, launched a contest for the best science fiction fantasy novels. And I was like, yeah, screw it. I'll throw my manuscript in. You know, what's the worst going to happen? I'm never going to win. And then I won. And, you know, so then thus, oh, hey, here's a publishing deal. You're full published. Go to Barnes and Noble and see your book next to Robert Heinlein, which is like, oh, crap, wow. You know, all right, this is where I'm at now. And oddly enough, it's actually how I met Pat. We were both entries into those contests, and we, you know, kind of collaborated as authors. We're like, oh my God, that's awesome. And so right when I had done that, the contest was done by Nerdist and Geek and Sundry. And Geek and Sundry had, you know, all of these shows going on, like GM Tips with Matt Mercer. You know, they were doing blog posts on gaming and things like that, but their coverage was largely focused around Dungeons and Dragons. And you know, somewhere along the line, the chief editor of Geek and Sundry had put out a call like, do we have anybody in our entire group that does something else besides Dungeons and Dragons? And quietly in the background of all the other like writers that were in their cabal, I'm like, yes, I have played every single game system and run like nearly everything else, largely except for D&D, which is hilarious because the biggest project that I am arguably more known for is the Red Opera Last Days of the Warlock, thus bringing a massive 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons thing over. Don't get me wrong, I played and run, you know, D&D in the past. It's just that my specialty was in, you know, horror games and, you know, the one-shots like Dread, 10 Candles, Rifts. You know, I don't know, there's probably, my game shelf just keeps going and going with endless books. So I started working for Geek and Sundry, doing press and covering games that weren't Dungeons and Dragons, and that eventually led me to start taking over the GM Tip series. You know, how to be a good storyteller, how to not mess up. Here's other games you can try, because when you have this sort of breadth of game libraries, and you can see what storytellers or game masters or dungeon masters are doing in every type of system, you can hopefully bring some different content to the table. So I did that for a while, you know, and then one thing just kept leading to another snowball. Work on this project, develop this book. I've you know, done some ghostwriting, some other novels for other people who thus shall remain nameless, because that is the purpose of being a ghostwriter. Sure. And last year, I think, no, it was about last year doesn't count. All right, we get a pass when anybody in this year says last year.
Right, because it's all one really big long year.
Right. You know, I mean, think about it this way: we're 4 months out from the end of 2021. All right,
yeah, I'm not ready. I still haven't recovered emotionally from 2020. Yeah. I'm not ready for 2022.
You know, so what? 2 years ago, I made a promise to myself. I was like, "This, and I'm done ghostwriting. Like, I'm not doing you know, other people's work," and I go back to my own. Finished up my sequel, and then we did the Red Opera, which we'll probably talk a whole lot about in a little bit. But then in that process, I got a three book publishing deal with Prince of Cats Publishing, like the Bard's Tower, and they have like all kinds of amazing authors in their rosters. Like Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote Star Trek Next Generation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so they picked up my books, and I'm a full series published author, and I get to go tell people, hey, here's crazy shenanigans with vampires, demons, and magic returning, and the horrible things that happen with that.
Yeah, I think any story that makes magic wondrous and that it's going to save the world, I call shenanigans on, because I've lived in our real world, and if real common folk, whatever you want to take that for, got magic, it would be chaos and terrible.
Well, yeah, because the whole, like, the way I looked at it was, so by day, this is important context, I am a union electrician in Chicago. And so a lot of the stories and a lot of the things that I get to bring about the settings, one of the comments that I always get told is the way I describe lighting the physical locations. Because I'm an electrician, so naturally I'm gonna pay attention. And so like I would be like walking around in the tunnels underneath O'Hare Airport, and I don't mean like the ones that people go in. I mean like the utility tunnels way down beneath it, and they are creepy and terrifying and scary. There is one of the things that I tell people pretty often, and kind of where this all ideas came from, is we were demolishing the Chicago Board of Trade, arguably the seat of money and power on Financial Street here in Chicago. And when we were taking down the walls and the panels and things like that, behind the vice president's office, there was this crazy looking arcane seal. And, the slogan that they had in the wall was, "A man's only worth is how much wealth you can generate," which is creepy because that is a terrible statement. And I went and did research on the symbol, and I found that it was the official Alchemy Guild symbol from 1863, which is about finding and turning your soul into gold. And my foreman with me was a total freaking hippie, and he is like, "Man, this place is like a church to money." I'm like, "Yeah, dude, it's the Board of Trade. Like, what do you think?" But we were finding slogans and things like that all around and like hidden in the walls and in the offices, like baked into when the building was constructed. And I was like, okay, these bastards have been hoarding magic for their own end. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, if everybody in the world today got magic, and you had to do things to get that magic, to get power, to get super strength, to be immortal, society as we know it would have a revolution. The power dynamic would shift, not necessarily for the better. You have this world where things can be organized and you can plan ahead and do things, but when you bring that chaos in, those unknown forces, things can spiral pretty quick. And last I checked, I don't think in my imagination could be wrong at times, but I don't think that a demon would be down with having it killed and its heart taken out and allowing somebody else to eat it. Usually,
I would imagine not.
Usually they kind of want to fight back on that one. So, and when you keep summoning them to get their blood and to get their powers, things are going to go wrong. And with the sequel in Dystopia, and I write them as standalone fictions, right? I want each book to be like, you could read Dystopia by itself, you could read Dawn by itself, but with Dystopia, I was like, okay, well, hold on a second. Magic's really come back. You're going to tell me that Walmart isn't going to find a way to like brand this and sell it for profit? Right. Like things are going to happen. And I get to play a lot with. I like Shadowrun a whole lot as a game system and a type. So the favorite thing for me as a writer in my second book that I loved is I researched and I had a lot of fun reading up old ad copy from like the 20s, the 30s, and the 50s when they were like selling stuff to newspapers and their little, how they would do that. And I was able to make like magic ads before every single chapter to help like set what's going on in the world. And those were an absolute blast to write. And it didn't hurt that I had done press now for 3.5 years. So I'm used to writing copy and taglines. And, the cheeky and the darkness in some commercials, particularly older commercials, it's actually horrifying. when you go back and you read them with today's context. So to take them and play with them in a fantasy aspect was an absolute blast.
That's amazing. I love that. I love when authors think outside of, like, the world building is always so important to me. Like, it's important to me in video games, it's important to me to movies, it's important to me in books. Like, it's very easy to tell a story and just have a hero and a villain and tell like the hero's tale. Like, that's pretty common. But when you make a world feel lived in, I think people are going to connect more with that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your early days. Obviously, I'm sure you watched a lot of Star Wars and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings and probably all the stuff that I watched as well and loved as well. Were you always writing during that time? Like when you were a kid growing up doing nerdy things, did you also write a lot then, or is writing something you came to later as an adult?
So as a kid, I was the pasty goth kid, right?
Hi, me too.
Yeah, right. It's definitely the child. I'm a child of the Oregon Trail generation, so
Yeah.
I come from the days when in order to get to the internet, we had to sacrifice something to have our modem scream at the world in order to connect.
Yep.
When I was a kid, my punishment for just about anything that I ever did wrong was to be grounded and to like be in my room. And so
Yeah.
it was reading for me. I would get lost in worlds entirely. And I'm one of those readers who's lucky enough to, when I'm reading a book, nothing else exists. I see everything, I can smell everything. I am there, fully immersed in whatever novel I'm reading it. So I read a lot of Stephen King, but not the Dark Tower side. A lot of the Salem's Lot and the Needful Things was, I think, one of the first books I read as like an 8-year-old. My mom had me read The Stand at one point, and I was like 10.
All right.
So
bold. Isn't it funny when you're a nerd of a certain age, the absolute lawlessness that existed from your parents if they weren't
totally just I get showed up to be grounded and then taken to concerts. But the fun of it is that all of the media that I did grow up on, and sure, it was never actually Star Trek, it was actually Star Wars for me, but Voltron and video games and RPGs, things like that. And so I got really into role-playing games from a really early on age. And so, I started like always planning campaigns and building things and whatnot. But I actually went to school for art. I didn't actually do any writing at that time, just storytelling, right?
Right.
And I went to college for art. I had grand ambitions of being a painter. And then I realized I have a rent bill. So I quickly changed careers, and I, entered in. I did everything from like bartending to carpet cleanings, late nights. I had sort of this stint for many years on sort of as a rolling stone, like crashing around at various friends' places through Chicago as I was picking up whatever side job I could have. And I did fall into doing like concert lighting and stage lighting for a while. And when I became a proper electrician, that kind of leveled things out. And for years, I didn't, I was like, oh, I should go back to being a painter. I should go back to doing art. But by that point, all of my art friends had crafted their skills to a point where the works that they were doing were just out of this world. And I was like, right. So I don't have that kind of time or energy to go back and, teach myself up to that. I just didn't, I kind of got that, like, I think every creative has it when you look at somebody else's work and you're like, internally, you are like just even smaller and you're like, that is amazing. I could never do that.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So work, at some point, somebody figured out I knew how to do math and I knew how to do computers and things like that. So they brought me into the office to be an estimator, and going from like being bartenders, late night jobs, concert lighting, to being in the field as an electrician, to, just kind of being physical, active out there, seeing and being around people all of the time. All of my jobs always involved like crowds and, events and performances, to then being in a cube farm underneath oppressive neon lighting or fluorescent lighting was soul crushing up to a bit. Like, it just straight up was like, hey, go to work, get up, do your thing, go back home, get up, go to work, do your thing, do math all day. And that part of me was going nuts. The creative side of me was like, I am going to die.
Yeah.
And I had been living and running so many games all of the time. So when I started writing, it first started off doing game writing for like these like little journals and these published little like Mind's Eye Society and magazines and stuff like that. But it was always focused towards that. And then I was ended up writing for these games. I had 600 people, and I was crafting their backstories, writing downtime actions for them, full plot emails, epilogue tales, introductory character arcs, and I was just cranking through word count, but for no real purpose. It was,
Right.
The purpose was to tell a good story, but it had to become a full time, job. But as a, free storyteller that was running this, and I was obsessed. I loved it. It was great. And then I was like, no, I need to take a break. And I sat down to actually make a novel to take all of these tales and these worlds that I had been playing in and these ideas that I had. And that's when I officially like crossed over into, no, I'm going to be a writer. So for me, it kind of came around the back way as like a necessity for my own sanity and a way for me to be creative, but still take this like life experience that I have, put that into a world of imagination.
Yeah. I mean, I want to comment on two things you said. One, talking about how like getting sucked into the day job of it all and forgetting about your artistic stuff or not having time for it, and how that like is agonizing. It's an anecdote really, but I went to the baby naming of an old friend of mine, someone I've known since I was a little kid, and that group of friends aren't very artistic, and not to any detriment. They're all creative people, but they are very much work a job, live a life, and like then their hobbies are just hobbies. They're not trying to like monetize their hobbies like the rest of us crazy people. And like talking to them, I realized I'm that guy. I'm the one friend in this group who is artistic and who does like wild shit and isn't holding a day job for very long because they're jumping to different things. And I just don't know how people like that live anymore. And I used to live that way too, but once you kind of start leaning into your creative side, I don't know how to stifle that. And like I have friends who don't, as far as I know at least, don't do anything creative. And all of them used to, like they all took art classes or drew or played music or played an instrument, and now they don't really. And they're perfectly content, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that just seems so foreign to me. I can't understand how a person can live like that. And then the other thing I wanted to comment about was how, like, your path, like you talk about how it was after like your first series of real jobs that you found this path and like started to grow in it. I'm starting to believe more and more as people around our age, I get the sense that we're about the same age, get older, that this fantasy of like people are doing art their whole life and they were destined to since they were kids. And like there are people who are like that, but I think because of TV and movies and books, we believe that's the majority. And I'm really starting to think, especially for our generation and after, that's not really how it is ever. It's mostly people finding themselves through their 20s and 30s, and then in their mid to late 30s go, oh, yeah, right. This is the thing I meant to do.
I gotta do a thing. No, there's to both points. Absolutely. The writing aspect and the work life to get there, right? It does two things for you. One, it gives you a whole bunch of reasons to be creative. You get inspiration from everything you've done in your life.
Right.
And then there's also then the work ethic part of it that does come into it, right? It's not just, even my art friends who can draw amazing, that's a decade of their life spent honing their craft to be able to draw that little bit in that 5-minute window. And you think, oh, that's so easy. They're just naturally talented. And it's like, no, Ashley's been literally had in a notebook, her entire life, and then has training and school and time,
right?
And it's the same. If you don't have that like work ethic to take something to finish, that you can't do anything with that. You don't actually complete it. And one of my friends, when I finished my novel the first time, before I'd entered into the contest, my friend Brandon was he's a cosplayer extraordinaire, but not the necessarily going out in the costumes. He's the special effects guy that makes all the crazy stuff that everybody wears. And if you've been to a convention, you've probably seen somebody in him and Tim's work. And when I got done with the book, and he was really proud of me, and he was like, awesome, great, now go hire an editor. And I was like, what, do you know how expensive editors are? That's crazy. And he was like, listen, even if you never publish this for anybody, and it's just for you, you have made a thing. You have to walk through all of the steps to finish the thing. And I did, which is partly why I think that I actually ended up winning the contest. Was, I had actually gone through all of the steps to have a completed manuscript. And, when you talk about your, you have your circles of friends and creatives doing stuff, I used to play a lot of like League of Legends, Diablo, RPGs, things like that, pretty consistently. I grew up on Warcraft 2, for Christ's sake. And gaming was the one thing that I had put out of my life, of video gaming, especially online competitive or online like MMORPGs, in part because I get asked a lot, like, Rick, you have a day job. You're working on 3 or 4 or 5 separate projects beyond just, your book series, usually at any given time. How do you have the time to do that, still go like work out and try to be healthy? And other things, I was like, well, it's priorities, right? I had a choice. I found that if I was playing League of Legends, for example, and I would queue up and I would win a game, I'm on a winning streak. Let's go forth and challenge more. And 5 hours later, I would still have been playing my entire night of League of Legends. Fun, but at the end of the day, I didn't feel any more whole from that.
Right.
Or if I lost, I just ended up having a bunch of like cigarettes and popping open a bottle of wine or something like that. It was like, it's a crappy day at League of Legends, but I would still play for the same amount of time. So I gave up. I was like, no, I got to give this up and do more writing, because if I, write and I finish a project or I finish a chapter, there's a sense of completion there. And then when you get to the point of taking it to show it out to the world, that fulfillment, comes home, even if you're nervous as hell when somebody's actually going to read your book. The scariest thing for, I think, a lot of writers is not when somebody picks up your book or says they're excited to read it. It's that time that they send you that message with the photo of them actually reading your book. And they're like, yes, I just started your book. And you hope that there's going to be another photo where they're much further into your book. So that's kind of how like I looked at the whole process, and having my life experience doing and seeing the weird things. God, there's this crazy story, another one that I have from Chicago that absolutely made it into my book. And slight spoiler, but you know what? Hey, if you're listening to the podcast at this point, you're listening to me talk. Have at it. In the first book, there's this plague demon that's made of like a swarm of insects and whatnot. Rather early on, the characters have to deal with this creature. In real life, I was going down into the Deep Tunnel Project, called CTA tunnels of Chicago. And, so we're really far down underground, and we're opening up all these old CTA closets, and we're repairing the telephone boards inside. These things have been down there forever. Right. And it's dark, you climb down a ladder all the way down, and you pop open a door, and you shine a flashlight inside, and you make the few adjustments that you need, and then you go on to the next one. I'm on my like 5th or 6th one, and it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There's no light anywhere. I couldn't tell you that it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just, that's what it is. And I pop open the closet door, and I just feel this wave of water wash over me. And I'm just there with my flashlight, like, oh, motherfucker. And I shine the light down, and I realize it's not a wave of water. It's a swarm of cockroaches that just tumbled out of this up to my waist. At which point, I do what any rational human being would do, which is start screaming at the top of your lungs and running the hell out of here. And I climb up, I have to leave my clothes and, everything there, because cockroach eggs, and drive home with just in my boxers with no feet, my boots are gone, everything is done. Yeah. But that memory, stuck with me. And when I'm trying to describe or relay, what it feels like to have a swarm of insects crawling over your body is something that if I didn't have that experience, not sure I could do it in the same way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would have never compared being awash with cockroaches with a wave of water, but it makes sense now that you say it. I'm thankfully never had that experience and hope to never have that experience. But that said, like that kind of correlation is really interesting. And yeah, I think once you have that kind of creative gene and you start using it, you are going to incorporate everything from your life into your work in one way, shape, or form. I am a person who has a multitude of podcasts, and like my passion for gaming has ebbed and flowed over the years, both tabletop and video games. And like I'm in two active tabletop campaigns right now, one Pathfinder and one 5e. And then like I am playing a ton of single player games at any given time. But like you, I used to love MMOs and a lot of online competitive games. And like I'll still play online games with friends if we're all playing together. But otherwise, a lot of that has fallen off also because a single player experience, like I can play a single player action game for 20 minutes and then turn it off. It sucks to only play for that short, but I can do that. But if I'm online and I'm with my friends especially, it's like, well, I can't just go off after an hour. Like we're hanging out and then you kind of get wrapped up in it. And so but that said, like because that shift has happened and I've started playing a lot more single player games, then I want to talk about a lot of those games on my gaming podcast, Fun and Games, because now my brain is refocused, and instead of thinking about live service games or MMOs or online competitive MOBAs, I'm thinking about these stories because I'm experiencing them more and I'm focusing on them and identifying with them more too. And I think that it's really fascinating that as a writer, you're pulling from these actual jobs, whatever the fuck that means. And like also, your life experiences. I want to talk a little bit about the Red Opera. Pat was on previously. Yep. It is now out. When Pat was out, we chatted about the anticipation of it and the Kickstarter, and now it's out and alive. What was the process like for you? Because Pat has talked about it, but like writing a D&D campaign, I have to imagine is similar to writing regular fiction, but there's got to be some, there's the gamification of all of it. So that's got to be a constant while you're writing it, right? You're writing the story in the back of your mind, especially since you're such an experienced tabletop player. You must do you find it was hard to get out of your own way when writing this narrative because of how much knowledge you have?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And that was it kind of intentional. So how the Red Opera got started, even as a conceptual idea, is, like I said, I had done concert lighting for years. So that means I have a lot of friends who are musicians and metal bands, right? And Dia Morte is in my kitchen, and we're having a bunch of glasses of mead, and they're actually, kind of lamenting how hard it is to get music out there to to become a sensation, or to get people to actually listen or try out your music, right? You can go perform, typically the method in the music industry is you go from stage and stage to stage to stage, city to city, you play a whole bunch of shows. But even getting to that point where you are booked to go do shows is difficult. And these are, some of the members from, Cradle of Filth and other famous metal bands. And we're all hanging out, drinking beer. And I was like, well, guys, everybody I know who likes metal usually also plays tabletop RPGs, right? There's the Venn diagram of those two tends to have a lot of overlap, particularly of age demographics down. I mean, sure, I think that there's probably there is a split there, but there's a big overlap. And so I'm like, you guys should make a D&D campaign, because you have this album, this Red Opera, right? And it has the characters, it has this this tragedy that they tell on stage when they do their full performance of Lacroix the Knight Captain, Dorian the Accursed King, and fate kind of caught in the middle. And then there's like the shadowy figures in the story, and their entire album had a story or a resonance to it. I was like, if you guys had this in instrumental form, I could run a campaign to this. And everybody in the room got really quiet, and they all looked at me and they're like, so Rick, what would it take for you to write this as a campaign? And I was like, Well, you get 10 tracks. So if an average adventure is, 2,000 words, about 20,000 words short, this is what it would look like. And I pulled out one of my gaming books, like it would be about this size. And, it would probably take me like a handful of months to go do it. And so, we agreed to do it. I sat down, I started writing. They sent me the song lyrics and they sent me all the band notes and their idea and their stage notes for their performance that they do on stage. And it was an absolute mess. It was completely incomprehensible, and I started finding plot holes left and right all throughout, their own album. And,
right.
So I spent like a good solid 2 weeks just listening to the music and like trying to like core down to the actual like story that they were doing. And I was like, all right, so I'm going to make a world of the Shadelands and create the city of warlocks and do this this whole element where the players, and I'd been writing GM tips for years. So at this point, I've known all the tricks of like, player agency and how do you have multiple endings and things like that. And so I was like, here's what we're going to do. I got this idea. We're going to take the Shadelands. We're going to create this city. We're going to, have these plot elements there. We're going to have multiple endings. We're going to set it around these warlocks. And I started writing and I started building the Shadelands out. And I was coming up with the plot and the idea how to run the adventure. I came up with this really awesome idea of like, you have the players write down a letter to their loved ones before the campaign and you fold it up and you hang it on your GM screen. And that if the characters ever die, you actually take that letter and you read it out loud and burn it in the campaign. And that character is resurrected, but everybody in the letter forgets about them. And because we wanted to do hard, like something more challenging, to play off the content. And I sat down and I looked at D&D and I was like, Dungeons and Dragons, death is trivial. You have, everybody has access to reincarnation or magic to come back, or even like lay people off in 5th edition. Killing somebody is actually really, really hard. With all the death saving throws, nobody ever dies really, unless it's, things go catastrophically wrong. And I was like, all right. So I was able to take and build this whole idea of Majin the Betrayer, who's one of the main characters in the Red Opera, and have him look at this like an experiment. Like, well, how do you kill a god in Dungeons and Dragons? How do you, in this world with magic in it, how do you advance? How do you climb up in power? And so I started writing, and I didn't even make it to chapter 1, and I was already at like 20,000 words. So I sat down in the middle of like this. I set down my mouse and I picked up the phone and I called Drake Mephisto from Diamorte, and I was like, so here's the deal. We're going to go beyond that word count because this story is good. I've created an entire setting. Here's the outline. If you want to walk through it, and here's what I'm envisioning. And it's going to be much bigger than 20,000 words. And, of course, I got to call him and tell him because we're under contract, right? I pitched a 20,000 word thing, and he was like, no, this is awesome and epic. Let's do it. And I'm like, okay, here's the thing. I won't be able to finish this one in time. By myself. We are now getting into the point. Game books are different than a singular novel. Like, yes, a novel can be 110, 120,000 words, 140,000. Game of Thrones gets huge. Harry Potter at the end gets massive. Right. But game books, when you hit stat blocks, you hit a wall, and because those will just slow your writing down to a crawl. And so I was like, I got a friend, Pat Edwards, loves D&D, plays D&D. I'm going to bring him onto the project. This way I will focus on the story and the plot lines and like the overall running the adventure. And then Pat is going to help flesh out the setting and go through and design all of the encounters. And then I also discovered that Pat has a love of magical items and trinkets. So Pat created like every freaking magical item in the book and just like was like, I'm gonna create magical loot for everybody. And so Pat had gotten in, and so it was a lot of fun co-authoring that one with Pat, because I would have like the overall plot line and the narrative and all the structure, and then like I would set it up, and then I'm like, okay, Pat, we got to have an encounter here. and Pat would then go on and then take it from there and design these like awesome dynamic encounters. Then he would send it to me and I go, "We're crazy. No, not going to happen." And then he would go, "Okay, I'll take it back and I'll rewrite it." And they resubmit it. And I was like, this is still crazy, but it's crazy with awesome. So, and so, Pat, even the name of the city, Yonkath, was actually penned by Pat because he's got a gift with coming up with fantasy names, and so we spent probably about 6-7 months, just Pat and I working on the project together, before we brought it to Apotheos Studios to be like, okay, we have something that is awesome. Now we need a publisher, because then you get into art, and David Grangio and Carlos and all the other artists that had worked on it. Sharon, our art was amazing, and that's the Apotheos Studios team. And then you have layout, and the layout artists are the unsung heroes of RPGs. And Sharon went through and did an awesome job. And then you also get the other logistics, which is the printing, the shipping, the distribution, how to run a Kickstarter, the marketing, all of the other things, and, that's where, Jameson, over the CEO of Apotheos Studios, that was his talent of taking an idea and then making it real, because it's that execution that's there. And so for Pat and I to watch our project get brought to life, was pretty freaking epic. And now that the book is in people's hands, it's beyond the, hey, this looks amazing, the artwork is fantastic. Now people are actually reading it and going into the campaign, which is sort of the long part. So now we're excited to hear people actually playing it and get involved in the story. We've already gotten feedback from people who are like, this is wicked cool. Because it's different. It's completely, it's very, very different from a lot of other published adventures in the fact that it's not a railroad. It's, fully embrace. It's almost like trying to bring that, White Wolf politics style, or the, Fiasco or Amber kind of open world styles of game running into 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, set for, higher end characters, or something could drop into anybody's campaign, and people could even scale it down to the lowest. You could run it at level 1, but we set it at level 20 because we've learned over the years that it's much harder to go upwards as a storyteller than it is to scale it down. And so we're stoked. It's out. It's in people's hands. The book looks absolutely gorgeous, and it's one of the largest game projects I have ever worked on. The only one that's going to eclipse it is the one that I'm working on next, which is Siren's Battle of the Bards, which is the next project by Apotheos Studios, and that one is bringing Satine Phoenix's vision of the Sirens show that she had. And, I've been working as writing director on that one, to do the same thing. Outlines and bring things, out there to set the frameworks and get all of these awesome guest writers to and contributing writers to make it cooler. But the word counts of these books are just huge.
Gigantic. I mean, they're essentially encyclopedias, because younger listeners might not know what an encyclopedia is, but they were these giant books that just had information in them, and you could look stuff up, like a dictionary for stuff.
Yeah, and both of these, size wise, I have the Red Arbor on the shelf up here behind me now. It's 2 to 3 normal campaign books in there, but that's because there's the whole story, the setting. We have a whole chapter on freaking food, because we want immersive gaming at the table. So we have recipes in there that you can actually make with your players, that amazing. Are Shadelands cuisine and stuff like that. Actually eat them. So because you want. The whole goal is to create an immersive experience for storytelling. And so we get to tie in the music, we get to tie in food, we get to tie in a badass story, and then we still got to provide and bookend it with all the gamification, Here's your stat blocks. Here's your cool powers. Here's different kinds of warlocks you can be. So it quickly becomes an all-consuming like project. At this point, I would definitely say that creating something like that is, a fair bit harder than, being like, oh, I'm going to write a novel, which is absurd to me because writing a novel still has a ton of work involved. And it's not the initial writing part. It's not the, here's the first draft on my computer. It's the 8 rounds of the editing stages and printing and, layout and like other stuff that is the longer portion of the publishing process.
Yeah, totally. I can absolutely see that. Before we start to wrap up, I would love to know, as a self-acclaimed geek of all kinds and someone who's into a lot of stuff, what kind of stuff have you been into lately, whether it's inspired or related to the stuff you're working on or not? Are there shows or games or books that you've been really into, especially in the last few years?
So, you had mentioned this earlier where you talk about like you've dialed back on gaming, but you still do single player RPGs. So, or single player action games or of the sorts. When I'm in between a project, playing a single mode RPG game where I can curl up under a blanket and press the X button is like the love of my life. Like I will play that to the nines. So currently I'm playing a lot of Genshin Impact. Is a game that I'm escaping away to because I love Breath of the Wild.
Sure.
Final Fantasy remake definitely like was right there into my soul. I have no qualms about admitting that I am one of the biggest Final Fantasy like fans that are out there. In 7, I do fall into the that metric of this was like one of my first games on the PlayStation.
Yeah.
So show wise, I love binge watching documentaries. And I'll watch those, but I also like, shows like Generation Hustle, which are like real stories of people like committing like fraud and crimes and stuff like that. There's plenty that I geek out about. Oh God, music. Anime. That's it. I am a giant cyberpunk nerd. So nice. I have been rereading again Battle Angel Alita. I'm just rewatching the movies. I found that they continued the series. I thought it was done, and I have all of them on my shelf. And then I discovered that after the movies, they continued and picked it back up. And I'm wow. Crap! That doesn't mean that I get to just go buy the latest edition. No, I have to go
buy all of them.
No, I have to go start from volume 1 again and read all the way through them back up. I love Cyberpunk as a medium. I have not played the new Cyberpunk game yet because I'm specifically waiting until I'm done with my next project. By then, hopefully, all of the things are fixed and I can have a PlayStation 5 and finally actually get one. So those are kind of the current things on my plate.
I love that you brought up classic RPGs and like, it's funny. So on my other podcast series, which is Fun and Games, I have a side series called Side Quests where a different host every episode does a little monologue from 5 to 15 minutes about a game they love and why they love it. And one of my good friends, Jessica Howard, did one on Final Fantasy VII, the original. It talks about how when she was a little girl and that game came out and like that stabbed me in the chest. I was like, oh my God, you were a child when that came out? I was a teenager. I'm so old. But like, I grew up playing RPGs kind of just like you. And like, I love a large swath of games, but games like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VI and
Suikoden 2 and Wild Arms to this day are still like, I can still like zone out and hear the music from those games.
Like, I feel like there's something specific about that kind of storytelling. And like, I'm in a place now where like, 60-hour RPG just sounds daunting to me. Like I've been playing a lot more indie games that are like between 6 and 10 hours because that's kind of like...
I just ran through Doki Doki Literature Club.
There you go.
So, great game. Super cute.
Yeah. Cute. Finger quotes.
Yeah, right. Finger quotes.
But like I found that those shorter experiences, like I get the adrenaline of completing things in a way that like I didn't get when I was a kid. Like, I mean, we all grew up, I'm pretty sure the same way. It's like you had a Super Nintendo and 3 games and you played those 3 games over and over and over again because that's all you had. Whereas now as an adult, I have like a 380 game library on Steam and I've probably played a third of them, if not less.
Oh man, the game that I think there's two gamer pride moments that I have is one, I have played and beaten and completed every single Mega Man game in existence.
Nice.
I have tattoos and inks of like Proto Man and Zero and stuff like that. Like
Perfect.
that was a thing.
The two best characters in all of Mega Man.
Yes. So those were games that I've always loved. But then Castlevania Symphony of the Night, if you want to talk about anything that's inspired all of my like styles and things that I like, that checked off every one of the boxes of here is Rick that needs to give us money. And that is the one game that I remember playing. Like I played Final Fantasy VII like 3 times. I played Suikoden Wild Arms, and I played all those series multiple times. But Castlevania Symphony of the Night was the game that I was like, no, not only am I going to have this castle at 100%, I'm going to have like everything at max level multiple times on playthroughs. And, you know, I'm going to do the Richter playthrough on it. That's like impossible to do. And I could do it. I think my skill as a gamer has gone down in that aspect though, because I was able to beat it then. But if I try to do that now, it's like have you ever gone back and tried to play the original Ninja Gaiden?
No, I refuse. I mean, yes, I've played it, but it's impossible.
It's impossible.
The third level, no one can get past the third level. I'm convinced. Like, that's it.
Yeah, I thought that same thing too. And then again, my fiance, British, I was like, hey, you've never played Ninja Gaiden. You have a Nintendo Switch. Try that. See if you can beat it. Go on. She comes back in 6 hours. I'm done. I beat it. And I'm like, that's it. My hat's off. All right.
Yeah, I've hit a point in my life where first of all, I've said it on this show, I've said it on other shows. Every game should have an easy mode. There is no reason to not give people access to games and let them play them. If they want to play them on hard, they can play them on hard. But like everybody should have a difficulty slider. Inclusive gaming is core to gaming. But like those old Nintendo games, like there's so many of them that I know I beat with Game Genie because they were impossibly hard on their own. And it's like, you know, Ninja Gaiden was one of them. I tried once, I think, to play the Xbox Ninja Gaiden, like the reboot.
Yeah.
And I got to like the first boss and kept dying. And I was like, well, I'm done. I've had enough. This is not a fun experience for me. But yeah, I think that the single player experience in gaming, especially in RPGs, is something I'll always have a tight connection to because it was the earliest version of storytelling that I understood. Like Chrono Trigger stands out to me because not only does it have so many endings, but the story they were telling was really intricate, and it was the spoiler alert for a very old game, but it was the first game I'd ever played where the main silent protagonist dies halfway through the game. And then there are multiple ways to handle that. Like, I'd never heard of that. And so, like, you know, or even with the most famous death in RPG history, especially modern RPG history, that happens in 7, I won't even say it because we have some people who've not played the original, like, that broke me as a young gamer.
Yes, that was
just... And I didn't think that was possible. I didn't think games could make me cry, whereas now as an adult, I cry over everything.
I mean, the game Last of Us, man, I was just sobbing the entire time. But those are the games that when I'm in between projects, right? Gaming storytelling as a medium that is an absolute form of art, and that is one of the ways that I go to veg off, turn off my brain, and just really enjoy content.
Yeah, totally. Well, before we wrap up, I have one other question. You know, we joked about it earlier that this never-ending year that was 2020 seems to have bled completely over into 2021, and we're heading into 2022 with the possibility of maybe another lockdown. Who the hell knows at this point? But I like to try and focus on the good that came out of the last couple of years, because there's not a lot of it, right? There was a lot of shit that went wrong, a lot of bad shit that happened. But is there a standout moment for you throughout the pandemic that is like, this is something that couldn't have happened at another time, or this is something that is truly great that happened that has seen me through this tough time?
My life during the pandemic had its moment of it was a boon for content creators in the sense that, you know, when everybody there was nothing to do but go do and create content. I wrote more words in the last year than ever possible. And I don't actually think that, and now they're all coming out, right? You know, Dystopia just came out, the Red Opera just came out. There's a whole nother project that will come out soon that I managed to, work on it with Pat as well. So, cool. we'll have news about that one when it's, actually out there. But the best thing that happened for me was the work from home. And, my day job, I was lucky and I was blessed. And I know I am in the fortunate fortunate section of my job to go to the office and just sit there. I could do math at home on a computer. I don't need to be at a desk to go do that. And that changed so much for my stress and work-life balance and things like that. So that even when things opened up, they're like, oh, people are going to come back to the office. And I was like, I've done more work last year than I have when I'm in the office because I don't have people coming into my office to talk to me. So I'm going to stay home. And they were like, okay. And so that's my, that those are like my things. Like as a content creator, to be able to be like, oh, I'm inspired, I'm going to write now, and then I'm going to do my work later at night, or vice versa, as long as I get it done by my deadline. That freedom of when to be able to prioritize your life around and move the Lego buckets of time into, something that resembles an existence has been a moment that I think that is good, because after every time there's a pandemic, there is a movement for workers' rights. And the thing that I hope to see in the future, and I like the idea that workers are speaking up about their freedoms, their risks, their safety. And I think that since every pandemic in history has led to a new revolution of workers' rights, even now when they talk about, oh, some people might be working at home, I've seen companies start discussing like, oh, we should have our on-site employees make more money for the burden of having to come on site, which is great. And I think that people and workers' rights movements have a chance to capitalize on something that only happens after a tragedy like that.
I agree completely. Like, I know tons of folks who were within the disabilities community who got a lot of flack for not being able to go into the office or having limitations on how they work, that now, because everybody has to be home and everybody isn't going to the office, they have this example of like, look, I've been working from home. I'm in a wheelchair, and so I can't get into the office easily. And now I'm working from home all this time. You see, my work has not changed since I've been working at home. Can I work from home and not go into the office because I don't need to? And like, I'm just making up a scenario, but like things like that. And I want to see that kind of stuff grow. I completely agree. I appreciate so much you taking the time, Rick. This has been a lovely conversation. Before you go, can you please tell folks where they can find you and your work on the internet?
Yes. And also before we go, Matt, thank you so much for having me on this. It's always a pleasure to come on and like nerd the hell out with people. And for people who have listened, everybody, thank you so much for listening. And if you want to find my random musings, I am on Twitter at CrankyBolt. I am on Facebook at CrankyBolt. You can find Seventh Age Dawn and Dystopia out in the wild, available at bookstores. If you buy a book, please leave a review. It is lifeblood to writers. The Red Opera can be found with Apotheosis Studios, and largely what you'll get from my social media presence, the scant posts that I do make, they are usually random urban fantasy bits and lores about cryptids and monsters, as I'm going to go to a state to travel to a convention. So every time I do that, I post about their urban legends that they have and be like, this is messed up. I love it.
I love that. Well, please go follow him, check out all of that stuff. The book looks awesome. The Red Opera is incredible. And so thank you again for sharing that and working on that awesome stuff. Before we wrap up, I have all of my guests do this thing. We have a saying on the show, which is music is life and life is good. It's born out of my old music podcast. And it's this idea that as long as you're creating, no matter how hard life gets, if you have something to pour yourself into, it's not that bad. So if you could just close out the show by saying music is life and life is good, we will end.
Easily. Music is life and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.nat.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds,
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there. So we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV.
CertainPOV.com.